How many of you have seen the TV show The Mandalorian? Okay, I see a number of hands raised. I'm kidding. Some of you are like, can he see me? Should I put on pants? You're fine. I'm just messing with you. But I know many of you have seen this TV show. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, The Mandalorian is a TV show set in the Star Wars universe. And it created quite a sensation with this adorable character, Baby Yoda. Our family, we rented the Disney Channel for 1 month over the Christmas holidays, and we watched this TV show, and it was okay. And but one of the things that did intrigue me was a number of the characters had these catchphrases that kind of had a biblical vibe to them. For example, one of the characters had a catchphrase, "I have spoken. I have spoken." And I just loved that. I've tried to use it in conversations myself. I just think it's fantastic. Another catchphrase belonged to the main character, the Mandalorian himself. And his catchphrase, he said this at least once an episode, I think. His catchphrase was this: "This is the way. This is the way." Now, doesn't that sound familiar? Now, for those of you who haven't seen this show, the Mandalorians are an ancient guild of warriors/bounty hunters who live by this strict or narrow code, kind of like the Knights of the Round Table. And for example, part of the code or the way of Mandalore is that they never take off their helmets and reveal their face in public. That's just one example. Now, what I observe throughout the show is that the way of Mandalore is a clear path that these Mandalorians live by. At one point, the Mandalorian says this. He says, "When one chooses to walk the way of the Mandalore, he is both hunter and prey. How can one be a coward if one chooses this way of life?" So the way of Mandalore, it's kind of all-encompassing. It's a way of life that includes all aspects of his life, and it's what enables him to make tough decisions. In fact, one of the things that I noticed is when the Mandalorian faces a difficult decision, say he has to make a sacrifice or risk his life to help other people, that is usually when he says his catchphrase. That's usually when he says, "This is the way. This is the way." And it's as if he's reminding himself and other people that this is the path he has committed himself to. Now, this is kind of what Jesus is talking about when he invites people to follow the narrow path in the Sermon on the Mount. He's saying, this is the way. This is the way to life. This is the code. This is the path that I want you to follow. And Jesus isn't doing anything unique here. In fact, for centuries before Jesus' time, rabbis or sages had given their students a path to follow. In Hebrew, the word for this was derek. So the rabbis or the sages would invite their students to follow the derek, the straight and narrow derek. And basically what that meant was this was the right path to live by. So Jesus was part of a common Jewish tradition here, simply doing what many rabbis and sages had done for centuries and were still doing in his own day. Namely, they were teaching a particular path, a particular way of life for their disciples to follow. Jesus' teachings on the narrow way were so central to early Christianity that in the first century, Christianity wasn't called Christianity. It was called the way. And early Christians weren't called Christians. They weren't called Jesus followers. They were called the way. They identified as the way or as followers of the way. Many of them were persecuted and arrested, and some of them were killed. And when family members or friends would ask them, "Why are you doing this? Why are you risking your life to follow this rabbi, this Jesus?" they would respond by saying, "This is the way. I'm risking my life because this is the way to life. Even if it leads to my death, this is the way to true life." So last week, I talked about the paradox of the narrow path. And on one side of the paradox is this truth, that the narrow way is unique to every individual. A part of what Jesus is doing by inviting us to follow the narrow path is to not follow the masses, to not get sucked into a herd mentality, a group mentality where we are just doing with our lives what everyone around us is doing. So that's one side of the paradox. But the other side of the paradox is this truth. Jesus is saying, follow my way, my particular path, my principles, my teachings. Jesus had a few catchphrases himself, and one of the most common of his catchphrases was this: follow me. Jesus didn't say, follow your dreams, follow your passions, follow your bliss. No, Jesus was very clear. He invited people to follow me, follow my way. Now, in the early 1990s, the delightful Lenny Kravitz released a song called Are You Gonna Go My Way? And Lenny Kravitz said in an interview that the lyrics were really the words of Jesus, the message of Jesus to the world today. And here are some of the lyrics. I was born long ago, 2,000 years ago. I am the chosen. I am the one. I have come to save the day, and I won't leave until I'm done. But what I really want to know is this: are you going to go my way? I think Lenny Kravitz is absolutely right. I think what Jesus is most interested in is, are we going to go his way? Are we going to follow his way? The way of love, the way of peace, the way of life. I remember a sermon where the pastor said the most important question that Jesus asks is this: who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? And at the time, the pastor convinced me. I agreed. But I disagree now. I believe that you can be on the Christ path. You can be following the way of Jesus, the narrow way, and have questions and doubts about who Jesus is. I don't think believing in the divinity of Jesus is what puts you on the narrow path. I think Jesus is very clear. What puts you on the narrow path is following the teachings of Jesus, actually living the teachings that Jesus gives to us. Think about it. How many times in the Gospels does Jesus ask people, who am I? Who do you say that I am? Well, only a few times. How many times does Jesus say, are you going to go my way? Are you going to follow me? Well, he says that to just about everyone he meets in the Gospels. I think it's very clear that the most important question to Jesus is this: are you going to go my way? Are you going to follow me? Are you going to follow my narrow path? What happened over time is that the church started focusing on making people believers instead of making them followers of the way. And this is a huge problem. And what that meant was the most important question for Christianity became, do you believe? Do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe Jesus is the Son of God? Do you believe Jesus died and rose again on the third day? And those are important things. But they were not the most important question for the early church or for Jesus. The most important question for the early church was not, do you believe? The most important question was, will you follow the way? The most important question for Jesus isn't, do you believe? The most important question is, are you going to go my way? Are you going to follow my teachings? Now, the early church for the first century or two, they understood this. The most important thing for them was following the way of Jesus. That's why they identified as the way, not as believers, but as the way, as followers of the way. But after a few centuries, well, Christians started enjoying wealth and power. They started enjoying the way of the world, the broad path. And what that meant was, well, following the way of Jesus just became a little too demanding. So the church made it easier. So instead of focusing on following the way, they focused on believing in. Because that's a whole lot easier. Believing certain things to be true about Jesus, that's a lot easier than actually following the teachings of Jesus. And here's the thing. When Christianity focused on believing rather than following, it lost its transformative power. It stopped changing people's lives, and it stopped impacting the people around us and the world around us. In fact, the church became part of the problem. And this is why we have entire brands of Christianity, some of them very popular, that claim to believe all the right things. And yet it seems everything they say and do and value is the opposite, completely contradictory to the way of Jesus, the teachings of Jesus. Now, don't get me wrong, beliefs are important. I mean, why would you follow the way of Jesus unless you believed that Jesus had accessed a depth of spirit and truth that is just on an entirely different level? I know I certainly believe that. But here's the thing. Belief isn't about doctrine. The point of belief isn't to get us to mentally assent, intellectually agree with certain doctrinal propositions. The point of belief is to trust Jesus so that we will follow him. You see, we won't follow the way of Jesus unless we really trust that Jesus knows what he's talking about. And that's the point of belief, is trust. And the point of trust is for us to actually follow and do what Jesus is telling us to do. Well, one of the big questions is, how do we know if we are following the way of Jesus? How do we know if we are following the narrow path? Well, let's go back to the Mandalorian. How do you think he knows if he was following the way of Mandalore? Well, I think it's obvious. When he says this is the way with such conviction, the reason he's doing that is because he has studied and trained, and he is well versed in the code of Mandalore. He doesn't have to guess, oh, I wonder what Mandalore... No, he knows because he has studied, he has trained, he has immersed himself into the way of Mandalore. And it's the same for those who follow the way of Jesus. If you want to know if you are following the narrow path, the way of Jesus or not, you have to immerse yourself in the teachings of Jesus. You have to study, you have to train, you have to become well versed in the principles that Jesus gives us to live by. There's no substitute for spending time in Jesus' teachings and getting to know what Jesus actually instructs us to do. I'm not saying that studying the Bible is alone the answer. In fact, it's not. We need teachers who understand the way of Jesus better than we do to help us really understand what Jesus' teachings mean, especially how they are to be applied in our 21st century context, which is just so different than Jesus' time and culture. We need mentors who have been following the way of Jesus longer than we have to give us good examples of what it actually looks like to follow the narrow path in our time and place. You need community. Read lots of books and listen to podcasts, all that stuff. But it's not just, probably the most important thing is to also have the presence. One of the unique things about what Jesus offers is he isn't just giving us a path of principles or a list of rules to live by. He also offers his presence to accompany us along the way. More on that next week. In conclusion, I want to bring us back to this most important question that Jesus asks us. Are you going to go my way? Are you going to follow my path? Are you going to apply my teachings to your life? That's really the most important question Jesus asks us, I believe. And when we sense the Spirit of Christ or the Jesus in the Gospels asking us that question, we have a decision to make. Are we going to follow his way or not? Are we going to apply his teachings or not? Now here's the thing. I have sensed the Spirit of Christ ask me this question hundreds of times. Are you going to go my way? And the reason I've sense the Spirit of Christ ask me this question so many times is because time and time again I find myself straying from the path and following some other way besides the way of Jesus. And eventually, the Spirit of Christ is so gracious and so patient, but eventually the Spirit of Christ finally, it says, Troy, what are you doing? What are you doing? You seem a little lost. Are you going to go my way, or are you going to continue to follow this dead-end path you're on? And sometimes my response is just to continue traveling the way I'm on. And the Spirit gives me space. Lets me dig my hole a little deeper. And then, in compassion and grace, the Spirit of Christ comes and says, Troy, what are you doing? It seems like a real mess you're getting yourself into. Do you want to follow my way? Are you going to go my way? And in that moment, I have a decision. And my language today is the decision is to reorient myself to the path, to the way of Jesus. Now, back in the day, in my childhood, we would call this recommitting ourselves or rededicating ourselves to Christ. And that language still works. I just prefer the language of reorientation today. And once I get back on that path, I start looking for trail markers. For anyone who has hiked a trail, say the Bruce Trail, which is a fantastic trail to hike, there are markers, little white markers about every kilometer or so, or certainly where there's a turn on the path. And those markers help you know that you're still on the path, you're still on the trail. Now, what are the markers on the narrow path, the way of Jesus? Well, we'll get into that maybe next week or the week after. But the question I want you to hear today is this most important question that Jesus asks: are you going to go my way?
I was born long ago. I'm the chosen, I'm the one. I have come to save the day. I won't leave until I'm done. So that's why you got to try. Got to breathe and have some fun. No, I'm not playing. I'll play this game, and I won't stop until I'm done. What I really wanna know is, are you gonna go my way? Are you gonna go my way? I don't know why we always cry. So we must leave and get undone. This planet back to one. So tell me why we got to die, kill each other one by one. We got to love the rubber duck. Got to dance and be in love. Gonna go my way. What I really wanna know is, are you gonna go my way?